So here's what we want to do today. We're going to identify strategies for mitigating some of those disasters that can happen any day, week, or month in the FM world. We want to talk about how to mitigate those threats. We want to talk about resilience, adaptability, and we also want your help. We definitely are going to make this an interactive event. So first, let me talk to you about our panel. I want to introduce you guys to the gentleman up front. Andy Gager. He is CEO of AMG International Consulting. He's got over 20 years of industry experience ranging from warehouse operations to plant management, plus another 20 years of consulting and training experience. His specialty lies in optimizing operations, maintenance best practices, and materials management. He's facilitated dozens of international improvement initiatives, and he's also a columnist for our own Facility Maintenance Decisions magazine, and he's a longtime NFMT presenter. He's also in his own personal nightmare right now because we're making him sit down. This man is a walker, and he wanted to walk, but we said, nope, stay up here. Larry Morgan has 45 years of progressive, tangible, and thought leadership accomplishment experience within the corporate and commercial real estate industry. We're really grateful for his relationship with NFMT and with our Building Operating Management magazine over the years. He's a past IFMA chapter president, former member of the board, 2017 IFMA Distinguished Member of the Year, and a highly sought-after IFMA Global Master Instructor. Larry's approach to training and education emphasizes a maximum return on human capital investments, and turns out he has seen a ghost or two in his time.
That's true.
We'll hear about that in a minute. He'll also be speaking tomorrow at 9:45 on that important topic of sustainability and its role in FM leadership. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
We're glad you're here. And for everyone else in the audience, as I said earlier, it's not a one-way conversation. We want to hear from you too. We're going to play a little attendee trick-or-treat. So we're going to start the conversation up here. And as the conversation goes, if you've got a question, a comment, feedback, raise your hand. You get to choose one of those little fun-size treats, and we want to hear from you too. We're not too proud to bribe. Okay, let's get the panel started. As we indicated, this is it's kind of a scary session. We're going to talk about some things that can be or might not always be easily explained that can go wrong in FM. And with that in mind, I'd like Larry to share a story from the Wells Fargo archives, lo these many years ago. Larry, have at it.
Many years ago. Okay, how many believe in paranormal experiences? Show of hands. I'm not talking about ghouly ghosts and stuff, but just stuff you go like, what? I have one for you, because I'm sort of a skeptic, because I'm a facilities guy. You know, most of it's black and white. It's either on or it's off. Well, I was in Lincoln Property Company. We bought a commercial property in downtown Denver, Alamo Plaza. The whole area was the original commercial places in Denver. It was an old bank building, an old Wells Fargo bank building built in the 1800s or so, and it was a way station for the Wells Fargo, what do they call them, the Pony Express kind of thing, where they brought gold in and gold out, where people kept their money. So we had to maintain some historical elements of the building because of the Historical Society and things like that, but we wanted to keep the vault door. It's cool thing, old school vault with the handles and all that stuff, not the new biometrics thing, although biometrics. So while we were doing renovations, the construction guys were calling us up saying, hey, there's something weird going on here. Okay, well, that's kind of an oxymoron for facilities renovations, right? Everything's weird in some respects. At certain times of the night, the bank vault handles would start moving back and forth. Yeah, right. So, you know, Denver, I thought maybe they were participating in the early weed days, but whatever. Went away. 3 months later, by quarter, it started happening again. Same time of night, 11 o'clock at night, Denver time. I said, I don't believe it. Put a camera on it. That was the old security camera days, like this size camera. So they sent me the video footage. Yes. 11 o'clock at night, every quarter, the bank vault handles start turning like somebody's either trying to lock it or get in or whatever. Hopefully they were trying to get out, but whatever. So we went back through the historical records. And it was true that the bank president, it was a regional president kind of guy, would come through every quarter, would go and would audit the vaults to make sure that there's X amount of gold or X amount of silver or what was in it at 11 o'clock at night. Now, this is the 1800s. Now, this is now late 80s, 89, 90, something like that. So that happened, and it continues to happen today. The chief engineer who I brought on board there, a longtime old friend, I called him before the session because it was Halloween, horror story kind of thing. And I said, is this still happening? He goes, yep, every quarter, right on the money. 11 o'clock at night, door handle starts moving back and forth like somebody's trying to get in or get out. True story. So that's my real paranormal experience. I've seen it with my own eyes. Nobody can explain it.
Thank you, Larry.
You're
Now,
welcome.
Andy, I think there's a story that you were going to talk about on the coast of California. Might not be easily explained, but it has a little more real-world scary element to it. Let's talk about that.
There's no ghost in my story. So, well, it depends on, I guess it depends on how you view it. I am currently working in Southern California right now with a pharmaceutical company. And if you ask me what is one of the key must-haves, all right, and that would be your asset hierarchy, and your equipment, bill, and materials. All right, in my opinion, that is an absolute must, okay? This particular facility I'm at right now has neither, all right? So they have no idea what they have, what equipment they have. Any of the PM programs are not in place. They're constantly running around, all right, looking for parts. And look, maintenance people, you are wired to fix things, right? One way or another, we will get this equipment back up or this facility put back together again, right? I mean, these are the individuals that were born with erector sets and Legos in their cribs, right? I mean, that's the way that they think, right? But the problem is, it is so incredibly expensive to shut some of this equipment down, and they're just scrambling around. They're flying parts in, which is incredibly expensive, okay? The number one items in their storeroom supply chain is duct tape and baling wire, okay? Just keep it going, right? Just stick your finger, just get me through this run, right? Or just get me through this. We'll worry about it later, okay? Right now, what we're trying to do is we're doing equipment walk down. We're walking down the facility. We're identifying the equipment, and we're doing a deep dive on the equipment bill of materials. We're looking at the parts in their storeroom or in their spare parts warehouse, which is non-existent, by the way. We had to create it because there were parts scattered every single place around the facility. And look, I travel around the world. That's what I do. I travel around the world. There is not a facility in the world that I have not gone into that doesn't have secret stashes of material somewhere around the facility. Now, I get it. I understand why, self-perseverance, right? To have the parts stashed somewhere because they've lost confidence that the parts are going to be there when they need them. So these are all the activities that we're doing. We're walking down the equipment. We're getting to lay the footprint of the facility down. We're looking at the HVAC systems. We're looking at all the different equipment that's in the facility. From there, then we're breaking it down to equipment bill of materials. And from there, we're breaking it down into what are the right parts that we should have in inventory at all times, at what inventory levels. Because I think everybody in this room understands, at least what I see coming out of it is, over the last couple of years since COVID hit, our lead times of spare parts have gotten really squirrely out there. Just because I got this pen in 2 days last time I ordered it, it could be 2 months to the next time we get it, right? So I'm seeing that settle down a little bit, okay? But it's incumbent that we have the right parts at the right time in order to preserve our facilities.
So let's ask him a question. We okay?
Yeah, take a piece of candy if you ask a question.
Okay.
Nice job. Good choice.
I have a question. We have a question. Show of hands. How many people in here actually have a facilities asset register? Shows their main pieces of equipment, like critical.
What do you think,
Why
20?
not everybody?
20%?
Critical pieces of equipment, HVAC parts, long lead time, things that must be online, especially for mission critical hospitals, police stations, fire stations, things like that. Hey, look, if this thing goes south, we're in trouble. How many? Oof. Wow. Okay. So I think Andy and I would both agree that you need to do a facility asset register. What do we have? Main pieces of equipment, prioritize them,
100%.
100%. So now you know what you got, what you need to have, what's a critical spare part, what stuff has long lead times, maybe a main switch panel that's, 3 weeks away, maybe a mission critical motor, 100 horsepower motor. You can't buy those at Walmart. You're gonna have to order them. So highly suggest you do that unless you want a horror story. Shutting down a building for 2 or 3 weeks because you don't have an asset register. Career limiting?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's going to keep a lot of people up at night. Sounds like you're kind of walking through the mist on the moors without that kind of visibility. We're going to change gears a little bit. And again, questions, raise hands, we're bribing. But Larry, I wanted to talk to you a little bit. You guys are talking about the career-limiting disasters, but another disaster that can sometimes come into a facility is water-based. I'd love to hear about that story, and again, maybe some awareness that could have helped prevent the nightmare.
So another true story. So this ghost dude busted a pipe in a building, just kidding. We had a major water leak in a building, and of course, Murphy's Law, it doesn't happen when the building engineer's there on Monday through Friday, right? It was a weekend, there was renovation going on, there was furniture moving going on, there was a big water pipe leak. It happened to be a sprinkler pipe, so if you ever smelled sprinkler pipe water, you'll know how bad it smells. And so they call us up, hey, there's a leak in the building, great, it's 32nd story of a building, water goes to the lowest point of entry, down the elevator shaft panel, shorting out electrical panels, transformers, everything's going sideways. Well, go shut the water off. Well, where is it? Dude, it's a sprinkler system, so obviously the fire riser in the stairwell would be the first place I would start. But then it came to light that, and I teach IFMA classes around the world, and I always ask during the operations and maintenance section of it, kind of going back to this critical spare parts inventory asset, if water is the main thing that could cause, think of all the things it could damage, right? Water finds the points of least resistance, goes down, shorts out electrical panels, now you got all this other problem. Now you also have the health and safety issues, mold, mildew, keep going down the lane, shutting buildings down. Where's the water isolation? Where's the water shutoff valves? Are they identified so that maybe security or housekeeping, if something, when Murphy does come into town, because he doesn't come in alone, it's usually cousins, brothers, aunts, uncles, the whole thing. It's just this cascade of nightmares. So another show of hands. How many people in this room have clearly identified where their main water shutoff valves or isolation valves to the restrooms, and you may know where they are, or your staff may know where they are, but what about the support staff, security, janitorial, somebody else? Show of hands, how many have that? Oof. We got a lot of work to do, buddy. We got a lot of work to do. So if water is one of the big, okay, if the power goes out in the building, so what? I mean, okay, we can fix that. But if water starts coming down the building and you start shutting off all your main pieces of equipment, you got health and safety issues, I think we would agree to prioritize where these valves are, who's responsible for them. I mean, even pictures of where they are, how to turn them off, things like that. True horror story. So the end result was $2.5 million worth of electrical damage, plus all the renovation, the sheetrock, the mold mitigation, another $1.5 million on top of just the hardware, and we had to pay tenants in their leases. It's called quiet enjoyment if you read their leases. It was landlord caused. They had to shut their buildings down or shut their facilities down to another tune of about $5 million in lost revenue, all because somebody didn't know where to shut the water off.
That's a preventable nightmare.
Absolutely preventable and predictable too.
In terms of the folks here who didn't raise your hands and now you realize we've got some work to do, what's the best way to document or identify the assets that are at risk, Larry, when it comes to that kind of a disaster? How do you explain that as you're speaking up to C-suite for a signage initiative, a labeling initiative, an educational moment for the staff?
Andy just did a session earlier today. You're talking to the C-suite people, it's all about money, right? It's in our world, if you kind of do the math matrix. It's usually about 5-to-1 ratio, five times more expensive to fix stuff than, if you spend $5 to fix stuff, if you spend $1 to make it not happen, you just have to break it down into tangible issues. If this happens, this is the potential loss. It's risk avoidance, mitigation, transfer. You just use it in terms of risk, and they get the picture pretty quick when you start talking dollars and cents.
5-to-1 is a good ratio to have, good rule of thumb.
That's what I use as a 5-to-1. It costs, typically, and maybe Andy can jump in on it, 5 times more expensive to fix something than if you spend $1 to either predictive maintenance, preventive maintenance, analytical maintenance, something along those lines. Having pictures of where your isolation valves are and training at least supervisors on what to do if there's a water leak in this building is a hell of a lot cheaper than $7.2 million in mitigated damages.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, let me just piggyback on that just a minute. Years ago, I was in West Texas, and the maintenance manager handed out assignment to one of the techs, and the work order was to repair a pump. And when the technician looked at the work order and saw what had to be done, he asked the maintenance manager, his name was Bill Brown, he's like, Bill, I was out there yesterday, I repaired that pump yesterday. And Bill turned around, to your point, Bill turned around and without missing a beat, what Bill said was, no, yesterday you worked on it, today I want you to fix it. All right, so there's a big difference, all right, to Larry's point, right? Are we continually working on our equipment or are we actually fixing it? So a typical maintenance budget, 1/3 of your budget is being wasted dollars, okay, because you're working on it, you're not fixing it. So the joke for the rest of the week was, we don't want a work order, we want a fix order. Right? So understand that when we talk about the money and how much are we actually wasting, right, just working on things and not actually repairing them and working on it.
Yeah.
Cheaper to keep her.
Yeah.
Andy, let's follow up a little bit on that. That, to me, sounds a little bit of a culture issue. It's how you bring your team in, how you explain the role, how you make sure they understand the vision that you have, fix versus repair. Fix versus work. You had talked earlier about Boeing experience. I wonder if there's a tie-in there, or maybe there's another example that rises up.
I'm going to change it up. I'm going to change, because right before we started, I was mentioning something earlier about the school district in which we live in. At the start of the school year, it was incredibly warm for the school district. And it's the largest school district in North Carolina, actually. That's where I live. And for the first week of school, they shut down over a dozen schools because the HVAC systems went out. This is the start of the school year. Start of the school year. And the HVAC systems went out on them. So what they had to do, they had to send all the students and the teachers home, all right, for the first week of school. And I actually did write an article on this, okay, about, the cost of maintaining the equipment. Going back to what we were just discussing is, look, we need to maintain this equipment. It's so easy for us to null and void a PM, okay? It's the easiest job to take out of any type of a schedule, take the PM out, okay? But what they're talking to the superintendent of the school district, what he said was, lead time on HVAC systems, it's just too squirrely, we don't know it. 2, it's incredibly expensive to replace these HVAC systems, and it's just not in the budget. And 3, we only have one certified HVAC technician to service the entire school district. So, I mean, there's a horror story right there. We're dependent on one person. And then when I was talking to this individual, I said, well, is there contractors available? And he just laughed. He's like, but we're at the mercy of the contractors because, they also are taking care of their customers, right? And the school districts don't typically have deep pockets to pay some of these contractors what they're charging these days. So, when we talk about the critical equipment, if you ask a maintenance manager or facilities manager, what's the most critical equipment we have here, they're like, everything, right? That's not reasonable and that's not feasible. So we need to take the emotion out of determining what truly is the most critical equipment and then go down, go from there. And then when we do identify the critical equipment, what is the appropriate preventive maintenance strategies? Do we continue to do inspections, which typically are PMs, or do we start moving more towards the predictive, the more technology, right? Where we can actually pick up on that potential failure way before it becomes a failure, right? And to your point, it's much cheaper to repair it than to allow it to run to failure.
Right?
And let me add, Andy brought up a great point. If you're at the mercy of some company or some vendor, you're not doing your job. Point blank. Because you're counting on them to do things that you should already have in place. Our vendors are our partners. I'm not at the mercy of them for anything. If I am, they're off the lot. They're off the lot in a hurry.
I think it's an interesting and, like you said, a non-emotional way of looking at things.
Yeah.
It sounds strong, but it truly is a very, very concrete statement. It's an
Very.
interesting approach. We were talking earlier as well about some other things in terms of the what's scary here versus what might be scary overseas. Both Andy and Larry have extensive overseas experience, either as training or as consulting. We talked a little bit about where some of our counterparts are versus where we are here. And I would love for maybe one or both of you to draw some contrasts and maybe what we can learn from those contrasts and help move forward to help prevent some of these scary instances from recurring here stateside. I'm throwing up the basketball for someone to tip.
Wow.
Okay.
Well, one of the things that Larry and I, we were talking earlier this morning is, when you do travel overseas, safety is not always the number one priority, okay? And I've witnessed it, okay? I've witnessed it where your most critical pieces of equipment or facilities will go down. I have seen it, I've witnessed it, where sometimes our priority of safety falls down the pecking order, and the priority is get her done, get it back up and running, okay? For example, I do quite a bit of work in Southeast Asia. When you start looking at their scaffolding over there, it's bamboo poles, all right? So fall protection, pretty non-existent, okay? Labor is cheap, labor is replaceable. But safety is always number one, always will be, okay? So,
Yeah, I spend tremendous amount of time in Europe and the Middle East, and it depends on the kind of the culture and the money behind it. So the Middle East, Qatar, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, places like that, I mean, they're filthy rich, right? So some of these things are like, okay, well, if I crash my Ferrari, I just go buy a new one. And that's kind of the mentality of how things go. But fortunately, that's changing as more global economies move into those areas and the people bring their culture into them. There's a lot of Eastern European people in the Middle East now that manage companies, that manage the assets for investments. So some of that's changing, but it's still, well, like Andy said, labor is a commodity in some of those locations where safety is like, yeah, whatever. The guy falls off the building, we'll just go get a new one. Fortunately for us in the U.S. and in North America, Canada, we have regulatory compliance, which is always the first thing on our list of must-dos, right? Otherwise, we're going to be in jail or get fined or kicked off the job site. So regulatory compliance is different around the world. Europe has a pretty stringent regulatory compliance as far as worker safety. France, Italy, Germany, very stringent, very strict. That's always priority number one. Here we have OSHA and Cal OSHA and Safe Canada. So those are kind of what we look at. So to me, it's always about the culture thing. What's the ownership structure? Is it a corporate ownership? Is it a commercial ownership? Because if you're in the commercial world, it's all about the bottom line, just return on investment, internal rates of return. They're always looking at that first, right? How do we get by? How do we maximize profit and minimize our expenses? Right?
Yeah. Thank you for that. When we're talking about culture, that's come up a couple times. I think one of the things, Larry, that you'll be talking about a little bit tomorrow is that leadership and that culture that you're trying to build as you're moving your staff through maybe an initiative, a new build, something like that. I'd love to see if there's an experience that you might have worked through, whether it's through your teaching or whether it's through actual FM experience, where culture played a role. Sometimes it didn't work out the way you thought, but there was a lesson learned along the way.
You want it first? You want it?
Yes, I would love to.
Andy will be playing the role of Larry right now.
I felt this coming. I felt it exuding from it.
Oh, man. Oh, no, this is a good one. So one of the other things that I do is I'll do assessments, all right? I'll come into the organizations and I'll do a laundry list of observations, and I print up a nice little report. And part of that process is I do a lot of interviews. I interview as many people as I can to get a clear understanding of what is the culture, all right? Because you can blow a lot of smoke, all right? But the more people I reach out and contact with and have discussions with, the more and more layers of that proverbial onion get peeled back, and I get a true sense of what is real, what's going on. So in this one particular facility I went into, I was interviewing 7 electricians, okay? And we were in the conference room, and behind me was the plant manager, his office. It was behind me, and the door closed. At the head of the table at the other end was apparently the alpha male of the electricians, okay? And what was funny is I would ask a question, and the 3 individuals on either side of the table would not answer the question until they looked at this guy at the end of the table. And he was so subtle, right? If he went, that meant they couldn't answer the question, right? But if I asked it and they all looked at him and he went, they would answer the question, right? So you obviously knew what was going on. But it became very obvious very quickly that these were 7 very angry men, okay? And it reflected on the culture of the organization. And at one point, and I'm telling you, it was about 10 minutes into this interview that I was conducting, that I just stopped and I said, all right, what's the story going on here, all right? And all of a sudden, the alpha male down here at the end of the table pipes up, and he's like, it's that SOB sitting on the other side of that door. And I'm like, a little bit more information here. He's like, they brought in a third-party consultant in here to give us an electrician's exam, test. And we all failed. And I'm like, we all failed? And he's like, I'm a master electrician. And I failed the exam. I'm like, all 7 of you guys failed this exam? And they're like, damn straight we all did. And we know why, because he wants to bust the union here. Okay? He gave us that third-party person came in, gave us the exam. We took it. All 7 of us failed because they want to fire us. And I'm like, all right, well, obviously this isn't going anywhere, so let's call it a day. So they all left. I went into the plant manager's office, and I said, you got some serious issues going on here. I said, you got some really angry people working for you, particularly the electricians. And he sat back. He's like, you know what? You're right. He goes, I know. He said, I brought in a third party to do a skills assessment exam for our electricians because I was trying to see our skills gap because I was going to bring in some training, but they administered the wrong exam to the electricians. And I said, what was the exam that they gave the electricians? And they said, they gave them the underwater welding exam.
Oh, jeez.
So I'm like, you got to go out there and explain to those folks out there that you need to take responsibility and apologize for that happening, okay? Because they're going to take you out back and tar and feather you, okay? So
Or put you underwater.
if you're going to give an electrician's skills assessment, make sure it's not an underwater welding exam, all right?
So I look at, well, let me give you the background. I've been in facilities my entire career. I got out of the military and I went into facilities just because I'm ADHD and I just get to fix something one day and fix something. So by trade, HVAC, electrician, plumber, painter, janitor, the whole deal. So I have 2 ways to look at it. There's the top-down leadership culture, the vision of what they want, and there's the bottom-up vision of the bottom-up mission culture. The people actually do the work. Where's that happy medium? Do they meet in the middle? I mean, the company says one thing, you look at their vision statement, and we love everybody, and then they pay people like crap. And what's the top culture saying and what's the bottom culture doing, right? If they're kind of aligned with each other, they don't have to be 100%, like right on top of each other. But, you know, kind of what you said earlier, 80-10, I go 80-20. So if 80% of the people in the organization, the facilities people, are marching to the same beat, they're kind of the same music, and they're kind of, moving towards that common goal, common purpose thing, we're pretty good. So what's the top saying? What's the top doing? I'm a massive believer in manage by walking around, like you mentioned earlier. The greatest lesson I ever learned from a cultural perspective was from Dave Packard, Hewlett-Packard guy. Walking around the plant 11 o'clock at night, asked me why I'm painting the wall. I didn't know him. I said, because my boss told me to. He says, well, I hate to tell you this, sir, but I own the company, and you shouldn't be painting the wall for me. That should be painting for everybody. And this is Dave Packard. 11 o'clock at night, walking around the building. 3 years later, we're at Palo Alto headquarters, and they had a cafeteria like military, a tray, and they throw your food on. And he comes walking in. Now, do you think he can go to the front of the line? Yeah. Do you think he can have a private dining? Yeah. He gets in line like everybody else and walks by me and says, hey, Larry, how you doing? I go, oh, hey, Dave, how are you? And he goes, so how's that plant looking? I said, spiffy, just for you. And it got a big crack up. So I look at it two ways. Top-down culture, bottom-up mission. Are we aligned? Yes or no? If not, what's the gap?
In terms of achieving that, what would you say people in the room here, what's their role? How do they help bridge the gap? What would the solution be to that nightmare?
I think you need to know your purpose and what your value is in the facilities.
Yeah.
This FM mind map, we're going to get to that. You want to go now?
Let's go.
Okay. There is an organization out of the UK called FM Gurus, and they created many years ago this FM mind map. So when you try and explain to your family, friends, relatives, or whatever, you're in facilities, what do? Oh, you're the janitorial company, right? Part of it. What do you do? It may take 6 months of trying to explain it to them. I just show them the FM mind map, and I go, okay, this is what we do. It's really cool. It's a great visualization tool. And I just explained to them, second only to salaries and compensation is what facilities does. Asset management, preventive, whatever. Keep going down the line. Look at the FM Guru mind map and you understand it. This is what we do. So I say, if you want to close that gap, know what your value is. The value of the how much are your asset? If you're responsible for a tremendous amount of corporate assets, what's the dollar? What's the bottom line? 40 million, 50 million, 100 million? I don't know. That's what Mandy mentioned earlier. Important to have an asset register because now you know what the value is. Like so walk into your boss's office and say, I want a raise. Why? Well, because I showed up on time. Well, good for you. Walk in your boss's office and say, in 2024, we were responsible for $40 million of corporate assets and we had less than 10% downtime. Now we're talking. Mm-hmm. Right? So know your value. What are you worth? What's your team? What's your payroll? Second only to salary and compensation of a company is what we do in this room. Know your value.
Absolutely.
That's how you close the gap.
Andy, the topic of cost came up in a previous conversation that we were all involved in. So can that information be useful or be leveraged in some of those more difficult cost conversations that sometimes happen when an investment isn't necessarily deemed to be necessary at that moment, when it's preventive maintenance starts to become deferred, starts to become disastrous?
Well, yeah, deferred maintenance, yeah, that's a whole, we could spend the rest of the time talking about deferred maintenance, to be honest with you. But, one of the main responsibilities for the maintenance groups is cost avoidance and cost reductions. We're not necessarily saving the company any money. We're not saving the facility or the school district or the business any money, right? When you save money, right, you put it in a savings account and you earn interest on it. What we're trying to do is cost avoidance. Now, in my previous session, I talked about this. When we talk to senior leadership, we need to talk their language, which is money, right? There is a proverbial pay me now or pay me later, and there's got to be some type of business case, financial business case, to prove why we want to invest, right, in this. One of the other things is well, I shouldn't say it's unfortunate, because it's the reality of the world. We try to extend the life expectancy of equipment as long as we possibly can. And sometimes we're throwing good money at poor equipment. That's a hard argument sometimes. I mean, I'm going through it right now with another client, right? They're currently using a piece of equipment that was, one, not designed for what they're using it for, and two, it's well beyond its useful life, well beyond it. So much so that when I Google, try to find some information on this piece of equipment, there's nothing even on the internet about this equipment. That's how old it is, okay? They're buying spare parts on eBay. Okay? Now, anybody in this room, because I'm seeing some heads shaking north and south here, all right? So you know what I'm talking about. When you're buying stuff on eBay, right? That's the reality. Or every single digit on your body is crossed, hoping that it's going to work, right? So at some point, there's got to be a business decision made to say, okay, let's cut our losses. Let's look at what is, and let's look what's available in the market. And I'm sorry, not to go off a little bit on this, but man, technology is you guys know this better than I do. Technology is moving at warp speed. Yeah. So there's a lot of equipment out there that is a lot more efficient, a lot more effective, a lot more cost efficient, but we got to build that financial business case for them to pull the trigger to go out and do that.
I use the term diminished return, right? So your own personal life. I mean, how many engines you want to put in your car before you decide you want to buy a new car? Right, it's diminished return. I'm going to bolt on just something I said earlier. Knowing what your value really goes along the lines of what's our value to the organization? Sustain our core business activities. I don't care where you are, school district, hospital, fire department, whatever. What we do, we're the sustainers of that core business activity. No lights, no building. No HVAC, no building. No productivity, whatever it is. Production, I don't care if you're making widgets or cars or spaceships or whatever it may be. We are the core sustainer of business activities. Without us, there is no productivity. So raise your hand and say, yeah, make a banner and put it on your car. Core sustainer of business activity, I want to raise. Yep.
That's a long banner, but that's a good banner.
It's a good banner.
I've got a question for the audience. I just want to know, show of hands, how many people here are responsible for the facilities budget? How many people here have that budgeting? So you are the ones who have to go in. And how many of you, when you send in those budgets, I'm about to ask an open-ended question. What's that process like? I mean, how much back and forth is there? Is it a one and done? Is it a wish list versus an actual accomplished, request? Just any feedback from that. I'm going to walk with the mic. We'd love to hear from you guys. Slow? Slow. All right, I'm coming. Both. It's both. It's a wish list, and it's also a slog. I'm going to bring Mike to you. I'd love to hear a little bit more. And when we're talking about this, I'm wondering between Larry and Andy, any kind of experience that you've seen in those successful conversations. And I know we've talked a little bit broadly about that, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of those targeted conversations we can have, especially at a budgeting moment in an organization.
Depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to finance, it's all about dollars and cents. If you're talking to HR, it's all about warm and fuzzy. So, you got to know their language when you're presenting a business case or a budget. In what language? HR wants the 7 different kinds of cappuccino machines, and finance says, how much is that going to cost? So there's that battle.
Well, when we budget, we look at it as you have your equipment list that you would like to have down the road. That's your wish list. But then you have your budget that you have to meet every year in repair and replacement. You know what those numbers are. And that's what I meant by both. Yeah. You have your wish list of what you want to accomplish down the road in new equipment versus what you know you have to deal with.
Yeah. Coming over, and I'm bringing the candy back. Hold on. You take this.
Okay. Hi again, Andy. So we're preparing our 2025 operational budget as we speak. I never got a clear-cut delineation of what my 2024 budget was. We operate probably in a neighborhood of between $12 and $13 million a year, and I'm being asked to operate around 7. But then we've asked to combine certain categories that don't make sense to be separated, and then they don't combine them, and we apply to those categories, and they want to know why we overspent. Well, if we were to combine them to the way it makes sense, we'd be there. But we get pushed back on everything, and we never get a clear explanation of what our actual budget is, and then we're preparing for the following year.
Yep. So there's a couple things, all right, because I was in that boat, all right, when I did budgeting. And man, that was painful, right? You sharpen the pencils, you crunch the numbers, you throw a little bit of extra fluff in there, right, just in case, and you throw it over the fence, and finance comes back and say, reduce your budgets by 10%. Right, or 11%, or whatever. Throw a number out, because they always come back. They never, at least in my experience, they've never come back and say, could you increase your budget by 10%, please? That's never happened, okay? So when I talk to different clients about this right here, when it comes to budgeting talk, what I say is a couple things. One, have you done a facility assessment? Okay, have you had somebody come in to do a facility assessment to give you a current state of the union assessment of the equipment that you have? From that assessment, we're going to lay out a 1, 3, 5, and 10-year capital CapEx budget, right? 3 years from now, we need to replace this HVAC or whatever the system might be, right? So we can build that into the long-term budget. Short term, all right, for next year, for 2025, what I recommend is to come up with activity-based budgeting. Yes. All right, versus what did we spend last year? That's your new budget for next year, all right? That just doesn't seem to work, to be honest with you. So activity-based budgeting. These are all the PMs, or these are all the maintenance tasks that we need to do to maintain this, okay? This is everything, the daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, biannual, annual. This is all the activities, maintenance activities that we need to perform. And then we crunch the numbers. Here's our budget. Here's our head count, right, budget, right? We'll add that into the budget. Here's our materials cost. We'll add that into, okay, so here's a whole laundry list. If you get to that level of budgeting and you throw it over the fence to finance and they respond to say, cut your budget by 10%, you're in a position to go back and say, not a problem, Mr. and Mrs. Financial Person. You tell me what maintenance strategy we need to take out of the budget to meet your budget requirements. Now, you've effectively thrown the ball back over the fence and put the responsibility on them. All right, not a problem. You want me to cut my budget by 10%? You tell me what maintenance strategy we're going to take out of the budget to meet the number you want to talk about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I have a tip and trick tool for you. Going back to Andy's thing, know your assets, right? And then prioritize them. P1, regulatory compliance, non-negotiable. Fire pumps, generators, life safety panels, non-negotiable. So here's how much this is. Priority 2, whatever the company's business is, if the building shut down, what would happen? HVAC, elevator, escalator, whatever that may be. Okay? So now you can go down. I use 5 categories. Priority 1, non-negotiable, period. It is what it is. Priority 5 is the nice to have kind of things, right? The pretty flowers, the long lawns, and the 7 different kinds of coffee. So because we all in facilities, every year it's like cut more. At what point in time can you not get any water out of a rock? So now, like Andy said, we throw it back on top of them. Here's all the priority 1, 2, 3, 4, and maybe 4 and 5, that's up to you. Then you have to tell the constituency, you're not getting fish on Fridays, just not what it's going to be, or whatever it may be. That way you have tangible asset proof to show somebody, like, we can't cut here, but we certainly cut here with your approval.
Okay, so I'm wondering, somewhere in the room, has anybody had an experience where they were successful in obtaining that additional budget, or in maybe not having that budget cut the way you thought? Any kind of messaging that you've been able to express? Here we go.
So at one point in my career, I had a boss. I sat down for my review, and my boss rated me as average on budgeting. And when I asked her why it was average, she said, "Well, you never beat your budget. You're always kind of right on." I said, "Isn't that the point of having a budget? Is that I'm always within 1% of what I told you I would be. So if you're constantly beating it, that just means you're padding your budget and you suck at budgeting." And she increased my review.
All right. Well, then you get 2 pieces of candy. All right.
Look, I can meet my budget. I'll just stop fixing things in October.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, too, is not just making the budget alone based on your facility, but look at other benchmarks.
Yeah.
Compare yourself to, you don't want to compare an oil and gas plant to a hospital.
Right.
And I think that's important. The other thing is matching sustainability goals. Some of the things that you were saying, are required, no argument. They're required because they're mandated by regulations, either federal, state, or even local. So I think that is important in putting the budget together, saying, we have to do this.
Yeah, tomorrow I'm doing a whole thing on, is a big plug for me, right? I'm doing a session tomorrow on sustainability and how that's transformed it from water cooler talk many years ago to now as part of corporate DNA. But my question to C-suite is, okay, you're telling the world that we're a sustainable company and you want facilities to be more sustainable. Where's my financial? Where's my capital investment? You want me to be net zero. I want to put photovoltaic on the roof, but it's going to cost $1.5 million. Well, wait a minute. Maybe we're really not that green after all. So I cover those things tomorrow.
All right, I did see a few other hands up, so I'm going to be, okay, getting my steps in. And I believe the hand that is up is one of the more experienced FM members of our audience. Your hand was up one of the longest when he asked how many years were under your belt. Here you go, sir.
Actually, when I was the director of a facility in a hospital, what I found the biggest cuts to me match my budget was renegotiating a lot of my contracts.
Yes.
First thing I did with a telecom provider, I saved $400,000.
Yes.
Then I renegotiated with Granger. Everybody knows Granger. They were trying to sell us a motor for one of our AC units for $4,000. I got it for a little over $1,000. So everything is negotiable. That was the first 6 months at the job, and I got called by the CEO to her office. I thought I was in trouble. She gave me a check for $8,000 because it saved them $500,000 in my first 6 months. So renegotiation, evaluating all your contracts, how we do business, there is a lot of wiggle room, tremendous amount of wiggle room, but you don't think it's possible? It is possible. I went from a big telecom to another big telecom. They cut the cost by half. It's possible.
Yeah, contracts are important too, kind of that thing, what was mentioned. What's your current service level agreement if you're talking about budgets and value and what we do? I mean, we potentially have contracts been in place for 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 years. What's the escalation clause? I mean, we can't get away from the union stuff, right? I mean, it is what it is. But, go back and review your current contracts and their service level agreements and the key performance indicators. There's probably some unsaid or unspoken things you can go back and negotiate. It's cheaper to keep a vendor that is your partner based on current service level agreements than it is to go out and bid and the RFP and all the drama that goes along with that. Maybe there's some room there to squeeze a little bit more. But at some point in time, they got to pay their people too, right? And I mean, they're in business. I mean, you can't squeeze them to the point to where they're going to close their doors.
Thank you for that. I'm going to give each of you a chance to kind of give some parting shots, if you will. But I just want to make sure if there's any other questions or feedback that we've got from the audience that we get to hear, everybody. We are...
Right in front of you, Wendy.
I didn't have my glasses on. Here we go.
Working with, I work for a municipality doing, and for working for government, everything else. So I find that the easiest way to get budget increases is to align your requests with the council's goals or the organization's goals, like, you know, just start labeling things as sustainable or equitable or whatever kind of lines their goals, you have to connect any kind of improvement projects with that, or your facilities, you know, like ADA compliance and everything else, especially if you go to regulatory commitments as well, like ADA or safety. Safety's a big one. If their push is safety, then I kind of, well, I'm playing the politics this year. They're focused on safety. That's what my request is going to focus on.
Thank you. Have you seen some success with that in either of your experiences, where you're really looking at kind of, it's almost talking up to that C-suite again, right? Hearing what their priorities are, making sure that even if it doesn't necessarily sound like yours, you can maybe create some synergy there.
After you. It's my turn again?
It's your turn, Andy.
It is?
Yeah.
Oh, God, I didn't study for this question.
Passing back and forth.
Oh. What was the question again?
Well, why don't we do this? Hold on, let me look at my watch. Okay. Got a few minutes left. I'm going to ask you one last question, ask Larry to wrap up as well, and then if there's any other follow-up, come on up and talk to the gentleman, and other than that, we'll be wrapped. So we were just talking about the need to align what your initiatives might be along with upper. It is that conversation with the decision makers. You know, you find out what their priorities are, and then you find a way to show them that your priorities are in fact the same. But maybe they weren't originally. Are there ways to finesse and ways to really enable that conversation?
Yeah, well, in the session that we just had next door, I talked a little bit about this. You know, I'm going to say the majority of the decisions are coming out of that C-suite, right? And that those decisions impact us out there, right, on a daily issue. And, you know, there's this thing called the adoption bell curve, right? The early adopters, and then it goes through it, and then you have the laggards on the far side of it, the people that will just never get on board, right? So how do you influence those people to you know, swing over to, you know, those adopters, right? And the only way I know about that is through communication and understand. So one of the best things that I saw a gentleman do years ago, they were making a major change. A decision was made, they were going to make a change. They announced it to the group, okay? Then what they did was they went away for 2 or 3 days, and then they circled back to every one of those individuals, because when you spring a change like that on somebody, all right, you're in a state of shock, essentially, right? How's this going to impact me on a personal level? So they don't even really have time to one, receive it, process it, filter it, and figure out, all right, where do I fit in this new change, right? So what they wound up doing was let it, as they say, let it marinate on them for a day or two. Let them cycle through that. Let them think through that process. All right, and then get some face time. Circle back and get some face time and ask them, what concerns do you have, or, you know, what questions do you have that I can answer? Because one of the things, for those that were in my group last time, you know that whenever I ended my staff meetings, any questions, comments, concerns, or rumors, right? Because I want to know the rumors that were going on in my plant, because then I could address those rumors, right? But it's the same thing, because everybody in this room understands that rumors are a cancer. And is everybody familiar with the kids' game, the whispering game? Yeah. You know the whole concept of it, right? I'll whisper something here, and by the time it gets to the back of the room, it is so far off of what I said, right? Same thing happens in all of our facilities, right? So we need to get more people engaged. The communication just needs to be a two-way street.
I'll close by saying, going back to one of my earlier statements, I mean, if you really want to have an impact, cross-functional impact, you got to know the value. You got to know your value, your and your team's value. I get the labor part of it. I mean, it's pretty easy to add up paychecks and say, okay, I pay my team X amount, but that's part of the discussion. You know, you got to think of it like building a pyramid. What's the foundation look like? It's big, it's broad-based, it's functionally sound. because by the time you get to the C-suite, they're not going to want a 2.5 hour dissertation on pump speeds and water pressure drops. It's not what they're into. So know your value, know what the core business value is, and then work your way up the pyramid. But also, know the language of the receiver. If you're having a conversation with, if you report to CFO type people, bean counters, if you want to call them that, no offense to those out there that count beans, but if you're having those kind of conversations, you need to translate your world into their world, which is dollars and cents. If you're having that same, if you report into HR, what are they all about? They're about the warm and fuzzy, hire, retraction, retention. So you got to know your core value. You got to know what it is that you do. How does this sustain the core business activity? And who am I talking to? I'm not going to talk finance to an HR person. They're like, dude, I don't care how much Starbucks costs. Just get it.
That was not necessarily a plug for Starbucks, but that is a great way to wrap up today's panel. And I would like to thank Andy and Larry for your time, your insights, and I would like to thank our audience too for your time, your
would too.
questions, your feedback.
Just one,
Andy's not done.
well,
It's not
two
done.
things.
Two
things.
Just two.
We speak at a lot of these conferences,
Yeah.
and it's funny because it always seems inevitable that the back of the room fills up first. And then we'll pepper the front rows down here, okay? But there's benefits to sitting in the front row. Could you look under your chair, please? Pick it up and take a look at it.
But put it in the work order first.
What's under there? That's a $10
$10,
bill. All right.
ladies and gentlemen.
So it does pay sometimes to sit in the front row. And the
That's
other
one
thing-
hand at craps.
Yeah, right. Or a half a coffee down the aisle. And then one last thing, everybody knows it. What happens in Las Vegas stays in Dubai. All right?
All right, I think that's the right way to wrap up today. Thank you so much.